Anyway, so my brother and I went back to figure out my father's estate. Most of the physical things that happen in the book with the cemetery and the apartment building. He owned a cemetery, owned apartment buildings. He was a really crazy guy and a criminal, and so it's based in a real little town that I grew up in. I knew Paris, Illinois, where all my all my farmer relatives had farms, and anyway, so that was part of it. The other one was that back in 73, 72, when I was in New Orleans, a lady lived across the hall from me who was a professional hooker. Her name was Dady, and that was what everybody called her. Anyway, she was kind of over the hill, and so somehow in my brain both sort of meshed. So the book is basically about Dady, who's been a prostitute for most of her adult life and ran away from home when she was 15, is now going back to Paris, Illinois for her mother's. Anyway, so I'm going to read you the beginning and then a little scene later on, and then that'll be enough probably. You guys interested? So it's called Under the Cold Stones now. The original title was just Dady, but publishers got to have their way. So starts in 1992. The sky was brilliant blue over rows of new corn circling, swinging by behind the telephone poles and fences, tapping the time. The interior of the bus was dim and quiet in comparison. One could be young here. With the folded up cuffs of Eugene and a ponytail, Dady had been young here once, long time ago. Somewhere there she played hayseed with a straw in her mouth and one of those round, ragged straw hats you got at the county fair. Somewhere there. She looked away. There were only a few others on the bus with her. The lady across the aisle looked about her age, but in a flannel shirt and jeans. No makeup, stringy hair. Dady felt overdressed. She was being met by her mother's friend and maybe the lawyer later. She had worn her best skirt and jacket, and now it felt a bit tight for this part of the country. Too much makeup, too, maybe. Were false eyelashes even done in Paris these days? "Excuse me, darling," she asked the lady. "What kind of crop is that? The soybeans?" "Oh, well, aren't I stupid?" The lady shrugged. "You going to Paris?" Dady asked. "Yeah, you?" "Yeah, my mother just died." "Oh, really? What was her name?" "Mary McIntyre." "I knew her. I'm sorry for your loss." "I wasn't very close to her." The woman nodded. She had a kind manner. Dady imagined her atop a tractor. Measuring herself up to her was silly. "You a farmer?" Dady asked. "My husband is. He's your mother's sharecropper on a farm, actually." "Well, it's a small world." "Paris, Illinois is a small place." "Do you know where you're staying?" "I have an address in my purse somewhere." "I can give you directions if you want." "I'm being met. Winston somebody." "Oh, he'll take care of you." Dady thought that Winston must have been the name of the football coach at the high school. It had stuck because of the cigarettes her mother smoked. And there she was, sitting in that overstuffed chair beside the full ashtray, some stupid thing on television. "That looks like shit. Go change." And Dady stopping, she didn't want to stop, to flip the bird and wait. "What the fuck?" And then she would rush out the front door as her mother struggled to get out of the chair. Thank God she was dead. There was the yardstick that finally broke on her back the last time her mother tried using it. Dady had laughed at her in spite of the stinging welts. At 16, Dady had snitched $300 from a coffee can her mother kept in the refrigerator, and carrying a suitcase, she stood on the highway with her thumb out. It was just dumb luck a cop hadn't seen her. The guy drove the bread truck that delivered to the restaurant where she was a waitress stopped for her. The only question he asked was where was she off to. Dady told him New Orleans. He wished her luck when he dropped her at the next little town. Nobody ever came looking for her. That was 23 years ago. 2 years ago, after drinking too much, she bought a Christmas card at a drugstore and mailed it at the next corner. A couple cards came, phone numbers were exchanged but never called. Then Winston called to tell her the bitch had died. There was a will. Life hadn't been too easy lately. John was in jail. No one called. She didn't have the heart to start strolling around the hotels at night again. The lady had said something, but it didn't register. Then she offered her hand. "My name is Hannah." Dady hadn't shaken hands with anyone in God knows how long. John had said she was beginning to touch him like his grandmother used to. She reached over and tried not to be too dainty. Hannah needed some hand lotion. Outside, the fields became scattered farms with long gravel drives, and then the yards appeared. Frame houses with brick porches lined the block behind shade trees and sidewalks. No one out and about on a spring morning. Hadn't there been a "Welcome to Paris" sign? None of it looked familiar. None of it. It could be any little town. The bus rolled down Main Street and pulled to stop in front of the Beacon News building. This she recognized. It was an excited green two-story stone building with a Beacon News in black lettering across the front and a 40s-looking windows on the second floor. Both women got up. Hannah motioned for her to go first. Was she going to hold the door for her as well? It was a bus. There was no door to hold. The town smelled like popcorn because of the big cereal factory north of town. She had forgotten. Her heels clicked on the sidewalk. It was so quiet here. There was a little man in overalls waiting beside the bus baggage storage. He had a cotton candy white beard that hid his face. Hannah picked him on the cheek. "This is my husband, Sean." Another handshake. He looked embarrassed. "I didn't learn your name," Hannah said. "Deidre," her husband said. Their bags were pulled out and set on the sidewalk in front of him. Sean picked up his wives, nodded, and walked off to the old pickup truck. Hannah waved and followed him. The bus left her there. She glanced at her reflection in the window of the newspaper office. Fluffing out her hair, she hoped no one inside noticed her being vain. Her hair was to die for. Thick auburn masses down to the middle of her back, and it would take any curl she wanted to give it. The guys would always start by burying their face in it. No sign of Winston. If he was a coach, he had to be in his 80s now. She couldn't picture him. She looked at herself again. The reflection didn't show age, which was nice. The suit was too tight for this little town. She would stop worrying about how she looked. It didn't matter here. She stood for a long time. It was hot in the sun. She was growing moist under her blouse. The truck came down the street and slowed to take a look at her. She didn't know him, she thought. She lit a cigarette. Let him gawk, she thought. Some excitement in corn country. Well, she couldn't just stand there and melt in the sun. She tossed the cigarette she was trying to quit anyway and carried her bag into the newspaper office. It was dark inside. There was a long counter across the front and desks. The open door in the back led to the press machinery sitting silently. Everything was wooden and old, unchanged from 60 years ago when it was new. She fished in her purse for the slip with her mother's address on it. The man came out the back. He was tall, with wire-rimmed glasses and a boy's haircut, gray hair, stooped shoulders, little pot belly, made him a little town newspaper guy. You'd know him anywhere. "Hey, good looking," he smiled, taken off guard. "I was supposed to be picked up, but he hadn't shown up. Can you tell me how to get to this address?" "It's not too far. Down Main Street, 3 blocks and then left, maybe just a couple more blocks after that." "You mind if I leave my bag with you and come back? It's too heavy to lug that far." "Not at all." He opened the little gate and brought it behind the counter. "Who was meeting you? I can give them a call." "All I have is my mother's number, and she just passed on." "You're Deidre." "Yes." This was odd. "I was a couple of years ahead of you in high school. Everybody thought you were probably dead." Hadn't occurred to me that anybody even noticed that I left. "Are you kidding?" he asked. She had to get out of here. She patted his cheek. "You're sweet. I'll come back in a bit to get it. Thanks." She lit up another cigarette outside. Was this the way it was going to be, with every man in town knowing her by name? She thought she could just sneak in here, get the money from her mother's estate, and leave without getting caught up in anything. She didn't want to be some kind of weird celebrity with people talking. Men had been looking at her all of her life, and she was used to being an object with a make-believe name. Tongues didn't wag in New Orleans. A block further, and her feet began to ache, and a tiny drip of sweat ran down her neck. She stopped in the shade of a large maple. A cat inching forward on its belly caught her eye. There was a baby bird flapping about in the grass between them. She walked over, shooed the cat away, and took a look. It was a fat little house wren with its mouth open. Above her, within reach, was a nest with 4 more gulping air as well. She needed something to scoop it up and put it back without touching it. The mother wouldn't feed it if it didn't smell right, or at least that's what she understood. She couldn't just leave it for the cat's lunch. The car stopped behind her. She looked around for something she could use. The little old man got out. This had to be Winston. "Sorry I'm late. I lost track of time. Boy, have you turned into a looker." He shook her hand, and his square face and bald head flushed red. "I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry." "No worries, son. I like being complimented. You got a piece of cardboard?" She pointed at the baby bird. He went to the car and came back with a brown paper bag. Folding in his scoop, she managed to pick up the bird, but her jacket wasn't going to let her stretch her arms up high enough. Put it down, took the jacket off to hand it to Winston. "That's all I'm taking off, hon," she replied to his look. The bird got home this time. She slipped the jacket back on as they walked to the car. She held the door for her and then climbed in behind the wheel, more flushed than before. She touched his arm. "Take a deep breath, hon." He obliged her. She told him about her suitcase, and he drove back to the newspaper office to retrieve it. Not letting her budge, he ran in, loaded it in the trunk, and climbed back in. Then they drove to her mother's apartment building. Sighing, she waited for him to run around and open the door for her, as she knew he would. There were about 10 apartments to the building. It was all decked out with phony shutters and white columns. Didn't look very run down at all, not what she expected. There was a brown manager sign on the door. A whiff of Chanel No. 5 inside made her gag. "Leave the door open, honey. It's stuffy in here." He dropped the suitcase by the door to the bedroom and handed her the keys. "Are you all right?" she asked. Why was he still flustered? She was his old and dear friend. I've never heard anyone say that about her. You've been gone a long time, Deidre. She started to correct him about the name she was used to, but held her tongue. She didn't want to explain anything. The lawyer couldn't meet today. He said tomorrow afternoon would be fine. "How long before you go back to New Orleans?" "I'm not. I closed up shop." "This town will seem real boring after where you've been." "Oh, I remember a few wild things about Paris," she smiled. "You look like a deer about to be run over." "I gotta go. About 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, I'll pick you up." "Sure, thanks." She rushed off. He didn't wave from the car, but he quickly glanced back at her in the doorway before driving off. So that's the beginning of the book. There's things that Winston knows that she will find out about as time goes on. So in the course of the